You're listening to the ProgAxia podcast.
Hi, it's Andy Phillips here and welcome back to the ProgAxia channel. This is my top 5, where I talk to musicians about the albums that influenced them and shaped their lives. And today we have the frontman with progressive rock band Warmrain, Leon Russell. Hi Leon, how you doing, mate?
I'm good, Andy, thank you. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, we've saw you the other day at the Prog the Forest gig. Fantastic set as usual.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was a pleasure to see you and for us to both stand there with our jaws open at the Quayle experience.
Oh, wasn't that wonderful? Yeah, I mean, if people don't know what the Joe Quayle thing is, she's like a cellist, goes through an electric cello and does loops and then plays on top of those loops and builds up these incredible tracks. Absolutely amazing. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I've seen loads of people who do loop stuff.
Yeah.
But that act was just off the scale. Absolutely off the scale.
Star of the show for me.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Anyway, we're going to do your top 5. And so let's start with your number 5 and let's just see where we go from here. So what's your number 5?
Well, kind of like akin to what Ryan was saying the other day. I hadn't really put them in sequence. I sort of just went through a few different ideas, and I've noticed I've made quite a lot of notes. And for some of my influences, they're like it's principles, and it can be like the bravery of certain records, or reinvention of a band's character, or the color palette they use. So some of it's not sonically inspirational to how I put the Warmrain stuff together, but the principles behind the artist's MO and mine are kind of what drives me.
Right.
So I was going to start with an album that probably not many people have heard of by a band that not many people have heard of. It's called Dark Side of the Moon. Yeah, I'm not sure if they shifted a couple of units by now, but the band's called Pink Floyd. They're from England. And they've had quite an illustrious career. And like I alluded to the other day, I could have easily picked all 5 of these records to be Floyd, because there's something cellular in my DNA that connects me to Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Right back to my childhood and to my parents playing their records. It must have influenced me before I even knew. And just because I'm English and they're English, genetically, there's a whole heap of reasons. So I could have gone for Animals, Medal, Wish You Were Here, The Final Cut, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's an insane album. And then I went for Dark Side of the Moon because I got a recollection of how it sort of first kind of like made an impression on me, and how I just remember it just seeming like unreal because it was so perfect. And it's one of those records that when you find out the history about it, and you realise that the actual recording and the mixing performance as well, people moving faders together in the band and the collaboration of their minds. I love the Claire Torrey story where she like comes out going, "Was that all right?" And they're like, great gig in the sky. And then the concept wasn't really obvious to me as a youngster. It was kind of like realised over time. I think from recollection, I think there was a strange smelling cigarette going around the room back then, and Bill Clinton wasn't around to give me any advice regarding inhalation. And yeah, it came my way, and I put some headphones on and listened to Dark Side of the Moon. I can remember taking them off and sort of going, am I imagining this, because it was just incredible, the sort of segue from track to track. And by the time you get to Us and Them and you that far into it, I was just like, man, this is incredible. So yeah, it's only 43 minutes. I've made some notes. It's only 43 minutes long, which seems bonkers. Obviously, Alan Parsons was like getting involved. And yeah, I just think sonically, the production, the songwriting, the execution, the time in their history where collaboration was a thing before it splintered off, and one of them, I can't remember who it was, started to sort of nose ahead of the others, mentioning no names. So yeah, the very under the radar record, Dark Side of the Moon by the very hardly known Pink Floyd.
It is a quite amazing album. And out in 1973, and I don't think people realise. I mean, when I've said this to the other guys who have done the top 5 about, when you go into the studio today, which a lot of people don't actually go into studios much anymore. They do a lot of stuff from home because just the technology is there to, have it on your computer, sit at home, layer stuff up, and you got 248 tracks or whatever, or 100 tracks. The guys didn't have any of that in them days, and to produce something as layered and sonically complex as this was an actual big task.
Massive. And
it's not the same as it is today. We have it very, very easy today. But when you think about it, were they on? They're probably on a 24 track by that time, I would have thought.
It was very innovative as well, and people kind of give him a little bit of wiggle room to sort of present them with things which were just new at the time, which now would be like commonplace. I just think all this great art has an elasticity. I know you and I have spoken about this before. It's like it's got an elasticity which is relative to your level of comprehension. So I could listen to this record as a teenager and gone, oh my God, what is this? Come back to it and gone, wow, I never realised they were doing that. Come back to it again. And each time my understanding grows over the years as a musician and a listener, the quality of what they did, like you say, in 1973, has got that capacity to move with my growing understanding of technical issues and just appreciation.
Yeah, very early sequences, on the run and stuff like that. It is really quite impressive. And this is why I like to sort of try and remind people that it was very early and they were pioneers. They were doing things that the sounds that no one had ever done before.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that footage, like classic footage of Roger Waters getting quite a grilling at the time and them sort of saying to him, well, where's the human element? This is electronic, this is a synthesizer. And he's like, human beings did have to program the synthesizer. So, yeah, you're right, very groundbreaking. I love the pioneering spirit of people back in the day when genres pretty much didn't exist. I love that. Nowadays, someone go, start a band, what do you want to do? Oh, should we be a blues band? Should we be a rock band? They didn't do that, did they?
No. Incredible album. And so you said it's sort of, the sound of this album sort of shaped what you do. Can you pinpoint sort of the sort of things that you do now that when you're actually writing, it sort of takes you back to albums like this, but also some of the other albums in your top 5, which we'll go through in a second. But does that happen to you? Because it happens to me as a musician when I'm writing stuff. I'm playing something and it sort of strikes a chord with something in the past, something I've heard, and it sort of you start bringing in that vibe as well.
Nice. Yeah, I think it can be like one word again when I've mentioned that I've made these notes is palette. Like, I think the palette of like the complexity, the colours of the Floyd stuff and the layering, it's just something that I can't help but go to really, is that kind of principle really of my brain starts off with one level, whether that's a guitar track or a vocal melody, and then I'm just start thinking about all the other stuff. And maybe that's like a Floyd influence. I don't like plagiarism as such. I don't like to judge people for doing whatever they want to do artistically or whatever in life. But personally, if I feel myself leaning towards something which reminds me of something, that'll often make me turn my back and go a different direction, because I don't want to cover their ground and I don't want to not be true to my own identity. But I think listening to how you're talking about feeling about this group and how I know my connection is to them, it's cellular just seems to be quite a good kind of like way of thinking about it. It's in the DNA. It's like Pink Floyd, English, prog.
Yeah, fantastic. So Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, your
Yep.
first one you picked. What's the next one?
The next one I'd like to talk about is by the Moody Blues. It's called "This Is the Moody Blues." It's a compilation. It's like in the day of vinyl, this strange medium that used to be the one and only way to listen to music. It was a four-sided double album. And this is quite typical of me in a way, because I absolutely adore this record, but being the sort of fussy stickler that I am, it's only side 3. I wouldn't listen to 1, 2, or 4. And when I was making my notes, I was thinking, God, this is typical of you, you know. And the reason that this record resonates with me so much is because neither of my parents can play musical instruments,
Right.
but they both love music, or loved in my dad's case, and their direct the direct exposure to their engagement with music was what set me off. So, for my influence from this record, it would come from the fact that I was exposed to them both interacting with music all my life. They couldn't play, but they'd sing along to everything. And my dad, this record, and I especially remember the 6 tracks of side 3, I can remember him just like knowing all the words, and I could see his engagement with it and his passion. Mum would be like singing other music at the time, doing stuff around the house and just jolly. And it was very, very direct and sort of obvious what music did for them and how it transported them and how they engaged with music. They weren't silent listeners, they were participating by singing along. And my dad, by his own admission, and I can testify to this, was tone deaf. And I've got a brilliant memory of coming down the stairs, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with a guy called Bob Dylan, but he's got a questionable vocal sound.
Really
Anyway,
hitting the obscure ones here. Really hitting the ones that no one's heard of.
I'm testing you today. So yeah, Bob Dylan, as you know, some people are Marmite kind of vocals. So I'm coming down the stairs. My dad, who by his own admission, like I say, and I can testify to it, tone deaf. He's in the lounge. He's listening to Lay Lady Lay. He's got the headphones on, so you know what it's like when you've got headphones on and you sing along, even if you weren't tone deaf and even if it wasn't Bob Dylan. And through a child's eyes, this perspective of coming down the stairs, and there's a tiny gap between the door and the frame, and I've kind of looked through going, what on earth is going on in here? Do I need to phone the police or an ambulance, or, you know, are all the local cats outside the front room window being attracted to this howling? And there's my dad singing along to Lay Lady Lay. But, you know, the overarching sort of memory is he wasn't there in that room on that sofa with those. Music took him to this place. And this record, I didn't have this record for maybe 20, 30 years. My own musical kind of evolution. I was like a prodigal son to prog rock. It's like where I started off, it's what I was brought up with. And then I went off on my own journey through music that was contemporary at the time, through my childhood and phases of my life, switching instruments, switching genres. And then kind of like when I was done with all of that as a drummer in a metal band, everybody was like, rah, and the main band was like that. We were the support band. Then you'd have a local support, you'd have DJs in between all night, just. So when we had the open road to go from city to city, and it was quiet 1:30 in the morning, what do we used to put on? Like Floyd, and Yes, and Rush, and all of that kind of stuff that everybody loved, and more obscure stuff, Captain Beyond. Then we would also like go to Crosby, Stills and Nash. It was all down, 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 down. And that sparked something in me after a conversation with a friend of mine, because that journey had taken all this time and come together to a point where a record came out through the metal band. And he said to me, if you want to keep going with this, jump back in the transit and do another 10 years of going round and round this circuit. And I was like, well, hold on a minute. And it had taken, you know, a decade to get to this point. And then I sort of thought, God, you've written all that like beautiful prog music years ago, and I picked it all up again, and that started the journey through a couple of incarnations to what is Warmrain now. So during that sort of meandering and going into these other sort of styles, I didn't have the Moody Blues. I hadn't listened to it for decades. I then got it, and every single word to all of those 6 songs was just stored in my brain like a file, you know. And that is part of the impression of just like, wow, isn't the human mind incredible? You know, where was that? It was that close for decades, and all it took was me to put it on and to know every single word to all of that. And it's like a proto-prog thing as well, you know. You know, they were groundbreaking band. I love the fact that there's Justin Hayward, Ray Thomas, Mike Pinder, John Lodge, these guys all writing their own music. So there's not one songwriter with one thread of style. There's a number of cards in their hand, and they're not too dissimilar. It's a nice spread without it being like, God, you can tell this is by someone. You can't really. You can only retrospectively look at the titles for the credits and go, oh, wow, it's one of his. So I think that's a really appealing aspect of what they do as well.
Yeah, because I mean, they are an incredible band. Because when we talk about the beginnings of prog, there's a lot of conversation goes around this concept that that King Crimson album was the first one, and everybody went, "Oh my God, prog is here." But when you think about it, Days of Future Past. Days of Future Past was 1967.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
King Crimson 1969.
Yeah.
And Days of Future Past was a concept album.
Wow.
And it was a symphonic concept album.
Wow.
And the record, this double album that you've got, has got songs from, it sort of predominantly goes for what they call the Magnificent Seven, isn't it? It's like the 7 albums that really shaped their progness, I guess. It goes right through from Days of Future Past right through the Seventh Sojourn, and that was 72 when that came out. So between 67 and 72, they brought out 7 albums, which are they're not like Yes and Genesis and Rush and all those sort of things. It's slightly different, but they were concept albums, or a lot of them were concept albums, or albums which were thematic.
Nice.
They were symphonic and acoustic, and I just think they're amazing. They're absolutely, those 7 albums, those what they call the Magnificent Seven, are incredible. And that's what this album that you've chosen, This Is the Moody Blues, is predominantly tracks from those 7 albums. And but it's like one of the things I want to try and do on this podcast is to remind people about some specific facts about things. So don't dismiss because it's not quite your cup of tea. Go and have a listen to some of this stuff, because it might not. When I listen to Days of Future Past, it's not the album that I sort of think to myself, this is brilliant. I'm good. This is one of my favorite prog albums ever. But historically, it's really, really important. And all those albums, right up to 72, are really, really important from the Moody Blues.
Yeah, I managed to pick up the CD for that last week from rehearsal rooms. As a 72-year-old chap was selling off his CD collection. I went through it, and there was that particular CD, and I thought, wow, I'm having that without a shadow of a doubt.
Incredible stuff, and that compilation, because I was gonna accuse you of cheating, to be honest, picking a compilation album. But
Until you found out I only listened to 6 songs from it.
They listened to 6 songs there, but I think it came out. Was it 74 that this came out? So I'll let you off with this one, because
I've learned a lot about Moody Blues history through your brief discussion of the sequence of the records. I've heard the Magnificent Seven phrase, but yeah, I mean, my knowledge of them is quite limited, to be fair, because it's honed in on those particular songs for those reasons. And the
memories that he gave, yeah.
Beg your pardon?
For the memories that
the accessibility of the melodies, and basically the engagement and the transportation of what good melodic music can do. So I think that would be why that influences me, because I listen to people who say, oh, I don't really listen to the words, or I listen to the sound the voice makes. And I kind of marvel, and my cogs stop turning. I think, what does that mean? Because my primary handle has always been the vocal line, the vocal melody, even through my own choices of the bands that I grew up listening to. My first 7-inch was like Kayleigh by Marillion. You know, I wouldn't have known anything about them as musicians. I wouldn't have known about their songwriting. All I knew was that melody to those vocals was so infectious. As a kid, I was like, I'm going to go and buy that from Woolworths or wherever it was at our price, you know.
Yeah, when it was still around. Yeah, remember the album section in Woolworths. So Moody Blues. This is the Moody Blues.
Yeah.
Good choice. I think it's a good choice, and it's good to remind people that, you know, that was a great outfit. Because it was when Justin Hayward and John Lodge sort of came into it that it turned from this sort of R&B band into a symphonic, pseudo progressive rock band that. I think I remember reading something about. I think it was one of the albums. I think it was Days of Futures Past, when it was a record company that wanted to showcase stereo, and they said, we want you to do something with an orchestra, but we want you to do, like, you know, these classic orchestral pieces with vocals and things like that. And then they just went, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead.
You're having a laugh, bloke. We're not doing that.
Exactly. Right, so that's the Moody Blues. What's your next one? What's the next one?
So in the list of my 5, the next one I'm going to go for Lateralus by the band Tool.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Different reason. Again, it will come down to the reinvention, the bravery. So the principles behind it. Sonically, I'm sure you wouldn't need me to tell you that that choice isn't going to be represented. Someone's not going to listen to Warmrain and go, oh, wow, these guys are Tool fans. But, you know, I've been present in the evolution of Tool since not the beginning, but pretty much near the start. I think about 94, I had tickets to go and see Tool in Brixton Academy.
Right.
The Rage Against the Machine had come over to the UK for the first time, and Tool was supporting. We were in the studio ourselves with the band at the time, so I gave my ticket to a friend, caught up with him afterwards, and I was like, what Rage Against the Machine like? And he was like, yeah, but Tool. And I was like, no, what? Okay. And he bought Undertow, and he put me onto that, tracks like Sober and Bottom. And in itself, if from an evolutionary point, that would have been the entirety of their character, I would have been like, wow, I love this band. So then I saw Tool then the same year. They played at Glastonbury. So I got to see them, despite having to not go to see them and give the ticket to my friend. And on the same day, Maynard scooted over to the other stage and guested for Tool. So I effectively saw him twice in one day. He guested for Rage Against the Machine, I beg pardon. And then they disappear. Because obviously these days, if a band's like, as you know, in between writing or touring or anything, there's so much BTS stuff. We know what people are doing on a daily basis. Back then, if a band disappeared off the sort of in vogue kind of narrow margins of column inches in a magazine or whatnot, we didn't know what they were doing. And then they would like return, as Tool did, like a couple of years later with Onima. And it was like, dear God, what on earth is this? You know, that album, it's good for me that it takes them a while to write, because it takes me a while to process what they've done. And the same thing with Lateralus. It's like the word progressive and Tool is just absolutely synonymous. It's like taken a while for them to be described as progressive rock. They were kind of progressive metal back then. People disown them because if his vocals weren't growling and screaming, it's like, what do we do with this band? But sonically, the distorted guitars were not all chunk. There was a lot of chord sort of textures to it. So by the time they get to Lateralus, again, a little break in between. And now Justin Chancellor's bass sound is just like absolutely, completely and utterly off the chart. The song Schism, it's just like, holy smoke. The videos they're doing by now, the Alex Gray relationship with his artwork, the sleeves, all of these principles that historically would mean a lot to myself and to you and to fellow prog fans. Artwork, album engagement, concepts, intellectualism.
Yeah.
It's just tick, 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 tick spirituality for my own journey. You know, my spirituality is really important to me. And I find out that, you know, certain songs on this record, the Fibonacci sequence is like literally audially manifested through songwriting sequencing. Schism, I believe, do you know Rick Beato?
Mm.
Yeah, Rick Beato, if you want to see him blowing his top about Tool, and I think he tells you that Schism's got like 47 meter changes in it. And he kind of like maps it all out for you as it switches from 6/8 to 7/8 to 8/8 to.
Yeah, if I haven't seen Rick Beato's YouTube channel, as a musician, it's a really, really interesting. Not even as a musician, but as a music lover, even.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting channel because he breaks down tracks.
Yeah.
He did a whole series of videos about what makes this song great, and they are absolutely brilliant because he's a musician and a producer. And he goes through these tracks with a fine-tooth comb, I would say, to try and break down what makes those tracks great. I remember he did the first one I ever saw was he did Roundabout by Yes.
Yeah.
And because he's got the tools to do this, he could do separated tracks, so you could hear just the bass and just the drums and just the vocals and things like that. And that was a really amazing piece of video. So if you can, you know, Rick Beato's YouTube channel, go and have a look at it because it's really, really interesting. as a musician, it's really interesting because you know when you go into a recording studio, you're trying to think of how am I going to layer this up? How am I going to separate this stuff out? How can I make this the central point, but still have other stuff around it? And Rick Beato goes through those things. I love that. I love that channel. It's a really good channel to go to.
I also love the fact that he celebrates simplicity. He's a man who's like virtuoso. He could play all these instruments standing on his head to technical degrees that would leave most people with their jaws dropped. And yet he will absolutely 1,000% appreciate, you know, you'll go, listen to that roll. It doesn't need to be. He can do that. He can tell you that they're playing a pentatonic minor over a seventh with a diminished, and he's just like, really? Okay, sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, great channel.
So yeah, his extra information into what Tool are about is incredible, really. And again, an interesting thing about Tool is the color palette. You know, they can do a whole record, and you kind of think they're using like a deep purple, dark blue, black, a grey. It's not a spectrum of colour. And I find that quite fascinating because Warmrain, we are quite a bright and colourful. Maybe live, we've kind of honed it down differently, but the whole Back Above the Clouds and the EPs, there's quite a lot of colour involved. So I kind of marvel. Sometimes I'm, you know, attracted to these things because of the differences. And I think that's an important life lesson for people. You sort of look at something that's different to you or a person that's different to you, and you can sort of appreciate it and go, wow, that's incredible, and not respond to the urge to sort of be like them, you know. And maybe like you could watch Stevie Vai play guitar and think, oh God, I may as well sell my guitar. Like, no, he's him and you're you. So you keep being you, keep believing in your just simple stuff that you can do, and watch him go, you know. So I think there's an aspect of that with Tool as well for me. It's not they obviously don't influence my writing, but the principles, again, I don't know what this is like as somebody who doesn't play an instrument, but I know you and I have discussed this before. You listen to music and you know the only way that song or that album came into existence was through a collaboration of people in a room trying out ideas, playing stuff, having happy accidents, turning stuff on its head, coming at it from the left and the right. There's music that wasn't written down on a piece of paper by one person for these and those, and then handed to other people, and they all layered up. There's music that you listen to it and you think, how the hell did you come up with that bridge that gets you from that into that? And that's what I marvel at with these guys. And obviously everybody threw their hat into the ring and had a lot to say about Fear Inoculum. Oh, it took 12 years, and finally the dust settled and they've all died down and gone wherever else it is that they've now gone to moan and pick stuff apart. And everyone can go, oh, great, thank you. I'll just be left with my relationship with this absolutely insane album quality. Danny Carey took like 3 months, like miking his drums up in the studio and talking about sounds with the engineer and switching stuff around. It's like, that just gets my absolute utmost respect. They spent 12 years writing, and then they'd send something to Maynard and you go, okay, I like that, but you need to make this bit longer for me, or take that. And then Justin Chancellor writes a lot of his riffs just walking around his land with his dogs. It comes into his head and he gets back and records on the back. You know, that again, that's a massive thing with Warmrain. You know, the melodies that I would come up with often just come without an instrument. If we're in the rehearsal room, Matt will say to Oscar and myself, right, stop a minute, I've got a new riff. The riff didn't come from his fretboard, the riff came into his mind as a melody that he then now needs to find on the fretboard. So there's all the sort of MO kind of aspects of the way that Tool approach what they do. And yeah, I've been lucky enough to sort of follow that through all of these stages. So there's probably a big reason for why I've chosen one of their records. I feel it wouldn't be appropriate to leave them out.
No, it's sort of surprising when I saw that in your list, because I don't really peg you for a Tool fan, but now you've said that, I completely understand it. And there's one interesting thing that you said there, which I thought was just me, but it may be many musicians. And I haven't really spoken about this with many musicians, but you talk about sound as in like a color palette. And I often do that. You know, I've actually said to my guitarist, you know, can you make it a bit more sort of bright blue rather than sort of, you know, this sort of dark grey. You know, it's got a sort of dark grey feel. Can you just make it a bit more bright blue? And people look at me like I'm mental. You know. But you have that same concept.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've always had a series of colours for notes. Is it synesthesia or something? Have you ever heard of that? With like an overlap of senses. So I remember hearing about the evolution of it kind of coming to the fore when there was somebody who was a lady was part of like a documentary I saw or something. She said she was waiting at a train station and she said to one of her friends, God, doesn't that train sound yellow? And her friend was like, what? You know, so she was one of the examples of how senses can cross over. I'm sure it's called synesthesia or something like that. So you
to look that up, because I remember seeing something on TV a little while ago with a guy who's he's a physicist, and he was saying something like, you know, pi, the numbers in pi smell like, you know, when you can always tell that they're the numbers in pi because it smells like petrol.
Wow.
And I just went, that is incredible. just the concept, the mental concept of that. And I suppose this is the same sort of thing, but I do feel like that. I feel like, you know, certain music or certain bands have a certain type of color palette around them. And it's weird that you do that. But anyway,
yeah.
Let's leave that for a psychology course.
Yeah, and I would like to just say that humour and Tool as well. There's always a track on every album, like on this one, it's Ticks and Leeches, where it's like quite vitriolic, and he will like just rip into something. He's got these incredibly intellectual and spiritual lyrics on the whole. There's a line on this record which is something along the lines of cold silence tends to atrophy any sense of compassion between lovers and brothers. And it's like, they're so arresting, his lyrics, once I get, because again, they never used to write the lyrics on albums. We didn't have the internet to go, what is he saying? You know, so it takes years to find this stuff out. And there's maybe a thread. You've just taught me loads about the Moody Blues today, Dark Side of the Moon. It took years for all of that concept. So I think there's a thread to all of that. There's a thread to these albums, and it comes down to this thing that I described, like with the elasticity of something having so much depth that it can, you can grow with it. It's not the other way around. You grow with it. After 20 years, you listen to Dark Side of the Moon, you realise that, oh my God, there's backing vocals on the backing vocals and the keyboards, you know, because you've grown. So I definitely think that's the thing with Tool as well. And I love the humour. Every record is just something really funny that he rips into.
Brilliant. And it is a great album. One of my favourites of Tool. So that's Tool.
Yep.
What's your next?
Next one is Riverside. Again, colour palette. Riverside, Love, Fear and the Time Machine. So they'd made a slight change to their character from the previous record. Was a bit heavier, and it was like there's a bravery. So the principal thing again of bravery, colour palette, reinvention. These are things I kept seeing cropping up. Sonically, they may be a bit closer to Warmrain than the other couple of bands. And again, principle-wise, melodies, really accessible kind of handle to the tracks. I know at one point, Oscar and I were discussing whether we hire a private investigator to follow Matt around to see if he sneaks off to Poland periodically, because we weren't sure if he was moonlighting, because the way that they approach their guitar melodies and vocal melodies. And another thing I love about this record is it takes you on a journey from prog, sort of, there's a nice character to it. There's a lot of layers, and then there's some heavy guitar riffs, and then without you knowing it, you've been taken into like an ambient sort of electronic sort of soundscape and brought back out again kind of gently. So there's a real journey to the record. There's soft vocals, really accessible guitar parts, layers. So I think a modern day spin on the Floyd thing, maybe like we because I know something that you stuck with me last time you and I spoke was you sort of acknowledged the Floydian sort of aspect of Warmrain, but said it's not that, you don't sound just like that. There's a bit in there. You even picked up on Crosby, Stills and Nash kind of thing with the layers of vocals and whatnot. And so Riverside, I think, maybe again schooled like we would be on Pink Floyd, and how's it not going to come out in what you do, because it's cellular.
Just to clarify this, because there is, you sound like you sound, and it's pretty unique in many ways, because and talking to you about some of these albums that you've mentioned so far, some of the sounds that Warmrain makes sort of make more sense now. I've understood this. But you give me the same vibe as Floyd do. You don't sound like Floyd.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing. It's like, so I was talking to someone the other day about Big Train, because we've been talking about
of course,
London's terrible accident, and he's now no longer with us. But Big Train always reminded me of Genesis in some ways, even though they don't sound like Genesis. It's just like when you listen to Big Train, I get the same feeling I do when I listen to Genesis. And when I listen to Warmrain, I get the same sort of feeling as when I've listened to Crosby, Stills and Nash or Pink Floyd or those sort of things. So, that's how I how I see it. It's not that you sound like Floyd, which is, because you don't, it's a completely different type of sound. But it just gives me that sort of that same feeling, and I think that's
Yes.
what I
Great
love about them.
explanation.
That, you know, I can get I go, God, that reminds me of something, but it doesn't remind me sonically just of the band,
Mm.
another band, but it sort of reminds me of how I feel when I listen to those sort of bands. That's how I feel when I listen to Warmrain.
Yeah, it's a brilliant explanation, mate. I love it. Yeah, I think the
So
colour palette with these boys, you know, I love Marius anyway. Lunatic Soul could have easily been Fractured by Lunatic Soul could have easily been the record that I chose, but it's a bit more electronic. It's not as prog as this in the classic sense of like the layers of instrumentation. The journey back to the song Time Travelers, I've made a few notes here, towards the blue horizon, beautiful storytelling. I love the bright production, the bass sound. Again, I noticed like the bass sound with Tool, the bass sound, because I did play bass for like about 9 years on my journey. So it must, you know, it must flag up for me. The bass sound on this, because Marius's bass is like obviously got to be spot on. This could easily be Stephen Wilson as well, as another note that I kind of made to myself when you listen to how he puts music together and his sensibilities. It's a very unjarring movement through style. I love the colour and the palette, the soft vocals, bright production. Um, Ether got some Gilmore almost momentary lapse of reason kind of guitar sounds on there. So I think that kind of helped me articulate what I was saying to you about how could they not have some form of manifestation of the Floyd DNA in that mixture, you know?
yeah,
Lyrics, great. I just really like this record, and it's there's other stuff that I've done which is over here or over there, heavier, but this is like okay, yeah, and I can just play it over and over. It's one of those records that you find yourself, you are engaged with it, but it's not ruling your consciousness. It's not dominating. You know, you could do something else at the same time and think, oh, did I miss that? And you think, no, I didn't actually. That went in and I followed that. So
because
lots of reasons, yeah.
this I mean, Riverside, I do love Riverside. I think Riverside are a really good band. I didn't even realise they were from Poland, to be honest. It's not one of those. I didn't realise they were a Polish band at all because they don't sound
Because of
like
his
a Polish
vocals.
band.
And because of the, yeah.
But the thing that sort of struck me was on this album, and it's one of the albums that I probably one of my favourites out of there because I am the albums that they were bringing out prior to this were very much on that sort of prog metal
Yeah.
vibe, but it was always very, I don't know, constrained prog metal. It was like really thought through prog metal.
Mm-hmm.
And this one isn't prog metal at all. I mean, there's some heavy moments in it, but
Yeah.
this is just a really beautiful album.
Yeah, I
And
think, yeah, you're right, because it gives me a vibe of like Porcupine Tree, then going to Wilson on his own. It's like
yeah,
what you've just described makes me think of that, really. It's like Riverside, yeah, definitely a metal vibe to the other stuff. And then this just went, hello.
yeah, and it's also one of those albums that you don't often see, but it's got as part of the instrument list a theremin.
Jimmy Page, eat your heart out.
Yes, exactly. No, great choice. This album specifically, I think, is a beautiful album. It's got sort of psychedelic and hypnotic vibes to it, and it's
Yeah.
also a little bit of sort of every so often you just get this little vibe of folk music come through, just little bits and pieces. You sort of think, well, it's a bit folky.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Blue Horizon, that track 2 or something. It's like straight. There's they're using like a nylon string guitar or something. But yeah, I definitely pick up on that. And when they do get locked into a heavy riff, that it's not all the amps aren't turned up growling and screaming at you. So maybe that's a Warmrain kind of twist on it as well. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to it as well, because there's some good riffs. I imagine if you saw this record live, like you would do with Warmrain, there's going to be a heavier element to it.
Yeah.
Just as how it's presented to you. But
No, it's a great album. So, Love, Fear, and Time Machine by Riverside. What's your next choice?
My next choice, surprisingly, is Discipline by King Crimson. So King Crimson, I just find them quite mind-bogglingly fantastic. I love Robert Fripp. I love his crazy eccentricities that some people might be turned off by. For me, it would just add to the magnetism of him. I'm an absolutely ginormous Frank Zappa fan, so I've got 67 Zappa records. Never got to see Frank, but I've seen Zappa play Zappa like 7, 8, 9 times. It's the one band that I've seen more than anyone else, without being on tour with them. And I just find that with the introduction of Adrian Belew and Tony Levin, and obviously Bill and Robert sort of, I think they have maybe 6, 7 year hiatus between these records, and then they've come back, they've reinvented themselves. All of my Zappa sort of love is sated in this kind of Adrian Belew involvement and the crazy way that they write music. If this album was just one track and it was just the track Indiscipline, I'd probably still pick it, because I'm so drawn to that song like a moth to the light. There's the Meltdown DVDs from Mexico City, and being a drummer, I imagine you might have heard of a few of the guys on there. There's Gavin something, I can't remember.
Yeah, Gavin something or other, wasn't it? Yeah.
Jeremy, oh yeah. And the version of Indiscipline, I can't tell you how many times I've watched that. It's like I can't get away from it. The riff itself is insanely brilliant. And then kind of like, luckily on the DVD, they double the length of the tracks. It's a surprisingly short track on the album, but it's literally double the length in Mexico. And then they use the horns live to kind of create this crazy discordant thing to this riff that's so compelling for me. So if this album just had that one track on it, I'd probably pick it for that. But with Elephant Talk and some stuff that I can't pronounce, like Mate Kudasai.
That's a good stab.
Yeah, that makes me think of like Albatross by Fleetwood Mac. There's something, you know, about how things make you feel. Thala Hun Ginjet, Heat in the Jungle. I love the secret recording that Robert Fripp did of Adrian Belew. He's come back from walking around London, I think, trying to record stuff to use in the studio. And then he's had all these crazy experiences, and without knowing it, Robert Fripp's recording him, telling them what's just happened to him, and that goes in. So I love those kind of things. I love the lyrics, the does humour belong in music thing again. I saw that as a theme with like Tool cropping up again with this record, because the lyrics to Indiscipline I just find, I probably, you know, I already know what he's going to say, but I'm still going to laugh about what they're singing about. It's under 40 minutes long as well. Elephant Talk, so the sensibilities of it, the sounds of it, again, there's no connection to Warmrain. You're not going to go, oh yeah, this guy, these guys who wrote this music, they like King Crimson. It's like, it's not like that, but there's the principles again, reinvention and bravery. I found myself thinking of like Sir Alex Ferguson from the football world, of like prepared to dismantle a title winning team and start again. It's like Robert Fripp, it's like Neil Young, it's like certain musicians who just like, they seem like, wow, and everyone's like, bloody hell, and they're like, yeah, that's good, that, isn't it? Right, let's do something new. Frank Zappa, you know. So those principles I just find like fascinating, really. I love the sonic aspect of the character of this record. Adrian Belew brings to it the era that it's recorded in as well. So yeah, so the benefits of technology at that time. And again, being a kid, like, you know, when Warmrain did what's that track called? Here Comes the Rain Again by Eurythmics. The part of the reasoning for that was like the impression that Eurythmics made on me as a kid. Again, like I know I've talked to you about this before, it's like I wasn't old enough to go, oh, this is a great song. Oh, listen to how they're doing that. And this is just about feeling and impression and like a very direct, undiluted connection with sound and emotion. And that Eurythmics used to just like, you know, whatever they did during that phase of my childhood, I didn't think to myself, oh, Eurythmics have put a new song out, I better go and stand by the telly going, wow, what's this, you know? It just did that to you. And I also realised that with Talking Heads, you know, and She Was, Once in a Lifetime, Road to Nowhere. There's a series of tracks that they did, which I undisputingly kind of just had a draw to. And I definitely get that vibe from this record with Adrian Belew, like having his history with working with Talking Heads. He's just done Shaky Booty with Frank Zappa. So the big part of him coming into the mix and the sound and the era that just makes me go, wow, and just latch onto this record. So, yeah, I love it for many, many reasons. And I love the band for many reasons, like going all the way back to the Lark's Tongue and 21st Century Schizoid. It's all just tick, 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 tick. Amazing.
Yeah. Because I seem to be getting people thinking that I don't like King Crimson, which I do. I do like King Crimson. It's just that there's some albums I'm not a lot of. This album is if nothing else, it's completely unique. If nothing else, I mean, if you said nothing else about this album, there is no other album that was done before this or since this that sounds like this.
It's a great idea, great angle.
There isn't. I mean, I can't think of any other pop record or rock record or progressive rock record that sounds like this album. The techniques they've used and the twin guitar stuff, which is insanely complex. It's not even hard. It's like it's just really insanely complex. That has some sort of just beautiful rhythm vibe to it as well. Because when you've got someone like Bill Bruford sitting in the back of that complex rhythm, at the front of it,
I can't help but think he could have made a career. He could have played a career out of drumming, that guy, if he'd have really knuckled down, I think.
I just think it's an incredible album. Sometimes I get a little bit fatigued listening to the whole album. I find I can't listen to a whole album all in one go. Like I can listen to most other bands. I can listen to like a Led Zeppelin album or a Rush album or a Genesis album. I can listen to all that all the way through because it's all different stuff. I do get a little fatigued, and I sort of pick a track and listen to it, or pick up a few tracks. And I mean, you talk about that third track. Matlai Kundasai, which I think is just absolutely beautiful. It's just it's probably my favorite track on it. I think it's just incredible track. So yeah, Discipline, King Crimson.
Very transporting song, that one that you singled out there. I definitely think I benefit from my Frank Zappa history, of prepares me for what these lunatics got up to.
Yeah, it is a mental album. It's a mad album. Anyway, so that's your top five. So just to quickly run down this, we had King Crimson.
A quick rundown, Sorry.
Riverside.
Yeah.
And Pink Floyd.
Surprise.
And Moody Blues.
Yeah.
Fantastic choices.
Fantastic.
My hat off to you, if I had one. And it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation with you, as usual. It always is. We always have a great chat. So just to round this off,
a speedy honourable mentions.
Yes, if you want to. Yes, let's do some honourable mentions.
I'll do really quickly for you. Right, so Hot Rats, obviously, even though Ryan touched upon that.
Yep.
Gazoos by Gong.
Yeah. I had that one in someone else's top five the other day, with all the marimba and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh, wow, brilliant. Gazpacho, Sawyers.
Yeah.
Sort of Muse, Radiohead vibes in there. That's just bonkers symphonic kind of album. Hand Cannot Erase by, can't think of his name. There's a guy in Prague who, anyway. But First Regret, incredible song. Always makes me think of like a Tommy kind of vibe, again with a bit of Crosby, Stills and Nash. Perfect Life, beautiful Routine. So also Inner Mountain Flame for the track You Know.
Oh, love
Billy Cobham.
I love that.
You know. I can remember having to work out how to play that and all the clicks and the timing. And goes, what a track!
Yeah.
Captain Beyond's very first album, and also Talk, Spirit of Eden, especially the song Desire, and then Lunatic Soul, Fractured, and probably other Lunatic Soul albums. But yeah, I mean, that's keeping it brief.
Brilliant. No, it's fantastic top five. Fantastic top five. Right. Just to round this off, I just want to talk about you're in the studio again now. You're sort of rehearsing, obviously, for a new album.
Yeah.
Any news on that yet?
Yeah, so basically we've got like 8. We're going to keep it to 8 or 9 tracks. We've got the concept in place. Really pleased with the material. Bonkers pleased with it. You know, I was having a cup of coffee and a cigarette the other morning, and I was just standing at the kitchen door looking at the trees and listening to the birds, and I got this moment of objectivity where I could see what we were doing from the outside, and I thought, oh my God, I really love this music. This is great. Not taking ownership of it and, you know, blowing your own trumpet. I just thought, this is whatever's coming through us at the moment is fantastic. So yeah, we got 5 or 6 of them that we've pretty much breathed all the life into them, and we're trying to take it quite organically, as Warmrain do. We just let stuff sort of grow, evolve in the rehearsal rooms, and yeah, I want to try and get it out. If we can't hit the April-May window of 2022, then it'll have to be after the summer, but as soon as possible, based on the fact that we're all absolute fusspot perfectionists, and it takes as long as it takes because it dictates to us when it's done. We don't go, that song's written, that song says to us, right, I'm done now.
Brilliant. Well, I really look forward to hearing it. So, Leon, thanks for joining us today. It's been absolutely fantastic. And don't forget, if you want more of this sort of stuff, subscribe to the channel and tell your friends about it as well. Thanks very much, Leon. It's been great.
Thank you for asking me.
Very, very soon.
Take care.
See you later, pal.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on the ProgAxia podcast. Don't forget to like this video and also to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. It really does help us. We'll see you next time.